To Dynamite, but let's start off with the major news of the day, and that is a series of announcements that came out of AEW, mainly the fact that the elusive third hour, Mr. Ting, will be premiering on Friday, August the 13th. It's going to start on Friday nights in a 1-hour time slot from 10 to 11 Eastern on TNT, titled AEW Quinton Jackson, and then, not to be confused by AEW Tom Billington, AEW Rampage will then be moving to TBS, as will Dynamite in 2022. Dynamite will stay on Wednesday nights, 8 till 10 Eastern, but both programs will be moving over to TBS in the new year. On top of that, they will be showcasing 4 quarterly specials throughout the year that will air on TNT, kind of in the style of Clash of the Champions. So, huge news. And I would imagine, Way, that the TBS component has come down in only recently because of the fact that they, one of the spokesmen, or the general manager for TBS and TNT, stated the fact that, yes, the NHL plays a factor in this, as do, several other programming decisions, but you would have to imagine that the TBS component, this was relatively recent that this whole thing came down, because Tony Khan had been talking about this only a few weeks ago, that they'd be willing to, listen to whatever options are there, but it would have to be worth their while. And it sounds like Tony Khan was very happy with the conditions of what this deal entails.
Certainly. I think it's a great, from all accounts, seems like it's a great win for AEW here. Not only do they have a chance to have more content on the Turner Network, it seems like contractually they got a bit of a raise. We don't know what those figures are yet, but I mean, Tony Khan has kind of made it seem like it's certainly worth their while. And that means more exposure for all the talent, and, AEW itself being a bigger brand as part of the Turner system. I mean, is it even Turner at this point? Or is it just
Yes.
Warner?
Warner Media, yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the big issue is, yes, Tony Khan had noted, he was on Busted Open Radio today, stating it was very, very fair financial considerations. So, I mean, they had a contract. So, I mean, they, I guess, were given quite the offer to make this move over to TBS. And what would also be interesting is, does this extend the length of their current existing deal? That was a 4-year deal that was to run up at the end of 2023. That was already going to include that third hour. But now they're moving over to TBS. So does this provide an extension? It sounds like it means much more money for them. So that's, to me, right there is a big win. The move from TNT to TBS, the difference in homes is minor. It's like TBS is actually, Brandon Thurston had this stat, it's something like 411,000 more homes have TBS. So it's of like very, very similar. And you're going to a network that, I mean, you do lean on a lot of history, of course, with wrestling on TBS that goes much further back than TNT's history.
At this point, I think seeing the loyalty of the AEW audience, they could go to the Oprah Winfrey Network, and I feel like they will do just fine, because this audience will follow them wherever they go. Moving from a TNT to a TBS, which is very much a lateral move. I would assume most people who get TNT get TBS. It's as simple of a flick of a switch, and I don't think AEW really loses anything from it. In fact, they gain a whole lot.
The Oprah Winfrey Network is in the Discovery family, so I mean that.
Ooh, crossover.
There could always be a, potential trickle down of AEW programming, but this will increase their schedule now to, I mean, you have Dynamite, Rampage, and also that half-hour reality series that's going to be launching at some point with Cody and Brandy Rhodes that they had initially stated would be TNT. So, I mean, Turner is all in on AEW, pardon the obvious pun there, but it's, to me, the fact that they were so, look at the Turner Sports portfolio. It is gigantic even before you include hockey, and they are making whatever concessions are needed to make sure that AEW has a stable home, that are financially compensated in such a way. Like, I take this as just Warner Media just doubling down on their commitment to professional wrestling.
Oh, absolutely. And I think at this point, like if you're Tony Khan, you're probably patting yourself on the back a little bit. I mean, maybe a whole lot, because this expansion of AEW in less than 2 years, to the point now where they are, have TV deals like this, a prime spot on Wednesday nights on a Turner cable station, hitting number one or at least doing incredibly well most weeks, and then now branching off into a third hour with multiple TV specials at what sounds like a pretty lucrative TV deal. This whole experiment has already, I would say, worked out pretty well.
Yeah. I have already inquired about, Rampage in Canada. I haven't, I did get a response, but not an answer yet. Obviously, with a lot of these things, like this comes out today. I wouldn't expect like that announcement is going to be made today. If you remember when Dynamite launched on TSN2 to be specific, it was only days before that we had reported that. It was a deal that was made very, very close to the premiere of Dynamite. So I don't even know. The fact is they were starting from scratch with AEW at that point. They have that existing relationship, but that would seem to be the landing spot for a Canadian home for Rampage.
You would have to imagine TSN, in one of their 5 channels would be a front runner to, house that show. But at the same time, TBS is a channel that is carried across many cable platforms in Canada. So I would imagine there'd be a bit of preempting going on nationally here. But there's always the chance that maybe they won't pick it up and it'll just air on TBS.
There's that option as well. Yes. Just looking at some of Tony Khan's comments, again, this was from Busted Open, where he had noted that they had approached him about making that third hour attached to Dynamite and making Dynamite 3 hours. And Tony Khan was pretty adamant about the fact he thought it was best utilized for that third hour to be its own hour on a separate night of the week. Do you agree with that assessment? Like, do you believe that there will be a healthy Friday night audience that you can replicate from Wednesdays?
I think it all depends on the quality of the product. I mean, will it be as strong as a Thursday primetime slot? Maybe not, but maybe who knows with this company, because I think they've overexceeded expectations throughout this entire run so far. I certainly think doing a third hour on a Wednesday attached to Dynamite would be a surefire way to truly burn out your audience. I think, somebody like Tony Khan sees a lot of the reception to a lot of what's going on, a lot of the response to Raw and the criticisms of really the 3 hours being the major. I mean, it's the quality of the show as well, but it's the exhaustion from the 3 hours that I think contributes to a lot of the negativity for that show. Not to mention the fact that, like, when you're trying to sell pay-per-views, 3 hours a week is really going to diminish, like, the I don't know, specialty of having to pay $50 for those shows. So I think he's very aware, and I definitely think this was the right move.
Yeah, and I mean, in theory, you have 2 million viewers watching a wrestling product on a Friday night that you would hope that you can gain some of that audience. I mean, that was the strategy that Impact utilized years ago when they first moved Impact to a Friday night. This was when they were on, I want to say Pop, one of their many stops along the way, yes, where they made it they went to a Friday night slot with the idea of, at that time, it was not that SmackDown was running on a Friday night, but it was, God, I'm trying to remember this. It was the idea that SmackDown proved that fans will watch on a Friday night. So it's not this night of the week that is foreign to wrestling fans. In this case, you do have the potential of your SmackDown audience that you're home on a Friday night, you're watching SmackDown, you're going to flip on a 60-minute show afterwards and sample AEW if you're not consuming the product on a regular basis, not going out of your way on a Wednesday to watch it.
It's a very interesting, I mean, for all the talk of these quote unquote Wednesday night wars ending, I really think we're going to continue to see comparisons, of course, and competition like this, even if it is just as simple as, SmackDown now being a lead into an AEW product. It almost feels like it's a game of chess where, like, okay, AEW makes the first move. Here's WWE, using their big piece, and then now they're retreating, and now AEW is on the offensive and on the attack. And they're going to downplay it all. Maybe they should, but it's, obviously this is strategic for AEW to have an open slot, first of all, but also to take advantage of that WWE audience. So how do you think WWE responds? Can they respond?
They can't, in the sense that if this were a move where SmackDown was on FS1 instead of Fox, I would be ready for them to announce SmackDown's moving to 3 hours. They can't on Fox. You have your local news at 10 o'clock. They can't extend SmackDown another hour. I thought it would have been really interesting if SmackDown was on FS1 instead, where you would have had that ability to not be subservient to network affiliates that have news commitments at 10 o'clock.
Well, they can promote, either the network, something right at 10 o'clock on Fridays consistently, or maybe even possibly, telling Fox or FS1, hey, we want to put another hour of brand new content out there.
Put an hour on FS1? I mean...
who knows?
Putting an hour on FS1 is interesting. That could be a possibility. I think it would do terrible, to be honest. Like, I don't think they have a fresh hour that they could go against this. I think that it would be... This is unlike WWE of 2 years ago that I think might have had more of an invincibility to them. They just got it handed to them on Wednesday nights with a very strong product in NXT. What are you going to put on FS1? What is FS1 going to want to get, that they're not going to want to just create an hour of programming for nothing. And FS1 is going to want something of substance. What would that substance be? If it's just SmackDown Plus, there's certainly, I'm not saying they're not going to do nothing. I think everyone looks at what will be the reaction to this, if anything.
The more likely scenario will probably be using that 10 o'clock slot on a Friday to promote something big on your on Peacock, to drive people's attentions away from TV. But we also don't know what Rampage's importance will be. Certainly, to start, I imagine being like a B show, what we would assume would be a B show, at 1 hour length on a national network. They will put everything they will into it to make it seem as big as Dynamite. But will it eventually kind of fall into a pattern of feeling more like, a show that might be skippable, like one of their other dark shows? We shall see.
We talk every week about how loaded Dynamite is. I think that they will put all their resources into this extra hour. Are you surprised at all that it's only 1 hour, that this wasn't a bigger show for them?
I'm sure, like, the idea, like, the reason that they had to start at 10 o'clock rather than maybe like an 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock start time might have had something to do with it. Also, I do imagine maybe the initial terms were for that additional hour rather than an additional 2 hours. Can you see it expanding in the future to a 2 hour on Fridays? Definitely.
I think anything is possible, certainly. I mean, there's look at as I said, there will be a point where it's 3.5 hours of AEW programming across TNT and TBS. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask, do you think that because it's starting at 10 o'clock on a Friday that we may see content-wise something... I mean, AEW Dynamite is already rather risque, like in the way that they have violence on the show, but, can we get more than just bitch on Friday nights at 10?
I mean, they go pretty far on Dynamite when it comes to violence. Another big point to all of this, this was reported by Tony Maglio, that when Rampage moves to TBS in the new year, it's not a guarantee yet it will stay on Friday nights. So that's worth noting as well. I would have a hard time imagining what other night you would program it for. It's obviously, I don't think you're going to see Mondays. Tuesday, I would have to look at TBS's schedule. I mean, TBS, you would think there's more flexibility than TNT, which has its NBA commitments on Tuesday and Thursday. Friday seems like the most logical place to leave it, if for nothing else, of that trickle-down effect of that SmackDown audience.
Thursday, it's even on TBS. You think there'll be a sports set that they'll potentially, hold wrestling off for?
Again, it's hard to say because we still don't know what the NHL schedule is going to look like. Based on this deal, you would assume that TNT is going to be placing NHL on Wednesday nights and keeping that hockey night. But they have a lot of that package, and could some of it be spread over to TBS? Again, they have lots of sports commitments, so that does make you a bit less nimble when it comes to scheduling.
Do you think the preemptions will end with them being on TBS now?
With Dynamite?
Yeah.
I think they'll be much more limited because you're not talking about basketball, which has been the key thing that has preempted them. So, I do think that should help. Another big part of this are those quarterly specials. So what they will now have is the 4 pay-per-views per year, and then these 4 quarterly specials that will air on TNT throughout the year. So you have kind of 8 shows to build towards. And I think that is very interesting because that is not something like the third hour we knew was coming. These we did not see coming. And when you look at, if you were looking to expand, these could have been 4 additional pay-per-views. So you look at that revenue you are giving up to do these specials on TV. That tells me that they are getting, it's worth their while financially to be doing this and putting these shows on free television as opposed to pay-per-view revenue for them that AEW is very much reliant upon. So I would imagine that's probably the biggest part of whatever new revenue has been found through this deal.
That could be very true. But, you have to also remember AEW charges a lot of money for their pay-per-views. At like, what, $50, $60. And to suddenly ask for your audience to do that 8 times a year instead of 4 times might be a bit of a big ask. So to do this instead, I think is not only, we don't know the financial terms, so it could be very well part of what you're saying, but also a way to broadcast and still publicize your brand by giving the audience free content so that more people may decide to 4 times a year pay for those $50, $60 shows. At this stage in AEW's kind of like growth, I think it is like a really smart move. They've been really smart about branding several big editions of Dynamite every year as, certain shows. I mean, even from their inception, doing the smaller shows like Fight for the Fallen and Fyter Fest, they've already established these shows as, B-level pay-per-views that they can now promote as like major events in a Clash of the Champions type of form on TV. So it's they've really handled this entire thing and the negotiations really well, it sounds like.
The NHL deal was only announced last month. So we heard like what Tony Khan had been stating about, what could happen to the schedule like this. When you look at all of this coming together in probably a small window of time, I would imagine that blood and guts match was probably a very, very important match in company history now that we look back upon it, and finishing number 1 that night on cable of what that show might have meant. And just, I would be very fascinated to hear what the last 2 weeks were like in the lead up to today's announcement.
I think that's a great point. Yeah. Does this announcement, or how does tonight's, I think you would have had today's announcement anyway, but, would those terms have changed? Would those amounts have changed without that number 1 that they can attach to themselves? So in hindsight, you have to imagine blood and guts being put onto TV in spite of perhaps what the audience, what the hardcore fan might think for storyline progression. Having something like this to brag about in your contract negotiations was probably a really smart move.
No, it was 100% the right move to put that on free television than pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Means it probably meant significantly more to have that rating that week versus a great buy rate and saving that for the pay-per-view. So there's still like a lot of questions attached to this. I'm very curious of what the new AEW taping schedule is going to look like, because they're continuing Dark, they're continuing Elevation. There's only so much that you can tape, and you're going to be going back on the road as well. So it's not like you're just can book Daly's Place 2 nights in a row. If you're going to an arena, I mean, to me, like your taping schedule, it has to increase beyond just once a week to fulfill all of this content.
So we know that they are doing Friday tapings, and I guess another question is: are these Friday shows going to be live? Or
I would imagine they are. Yeah,
because they've announced that show in St. Louis right before Full Gear. That was already Friday night taping. I mean, can we expect it to be a 10 o'clock start, 10 Eastern start, or would it be live to tape? to broadcast that delay,
I mean, if it's live, I mean, that late of a start time actually plays really well if you're playing on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Where often, I mean, television tapings on the West Coast, you're talking about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. So, yeah, it'll be interesting because they have not announced, beyond that Friday date in November, they have not announced them. Like, will they do weekly? Will it be, you do... Because it's only a 1-hour show. I would have a hard time imagining that you're going to be able to sell tickets to just a 1-hour television show, even if you tack on Dark or Dark Elevation to it. I think you'd want to try and bulk shoot and get at least 2 episodes per taping on a Friday.